It's WRVS 89.9 Soul Cafe with me, Caya, your mood supply, here giving you the best variety of R&B to wake up your midday. But in addition to giving you R&B that you know and love, we also give you all the interviews for what's hot in Elizabeth City, what's going on here at ECSU, and so much more. Today, I have the pleasure of having somebody in here who will be in the Harbor of Hospitality very, very soon with our lovely ECSU Community Connection series that brings so many different kinds of cultural phenomenons, cultivators, experiences to this city. Today, I have historian Dr. David Cecelski with me here today. Hello, hello.
It's great to be here. It's great to be talking to Elizabeth City. It's one of my favorite places.
Yes, and you have a lot of people may say, oh, well, what do you know about Elizabeth City? But no, family, we have someone here who is very, very in contact with coastal Carolina. As a historian, he's also an author for coastalreview.org. He has his own website, which you can visit if you want to contact him or just view some more of his writings at davidcecelski.com. That's David, CECELSKI.com. Now, family, getting into the meat of it, we have this Community Connections event that is coming up on April 21st at 6 p.m., courtesy of the Community Connections series. He's a historian known for his award-winning books and hundreds of articles about history, culture, and politics, specifically on the North Carolina coast. So yes, family, he has very much contact and some context with coastal Carolina, especially Elizabeth City. So as a historian, what made you focus on, the coastal Carolinas? It's an area that often gets overlooked if you're not talking about the Outer Banks.
I grew up there. I still have the family farm down near Beaufort. I grew up amongst storytellers in a historically interesting, multiracial, multicultural little community where everything seemed to have a story, and I think I was like born to listen to those stories and share them. And I'm not a young man anymore, but I still love to hear the stories from Eastern North Carolina, and all my work, one way or the other, goes back to Eastern North Carolina. I'm a world in a grain of sand kind of guy, and my grain of sand is the North Carolina coast.
Thank you so much for highlighting the North Carolina coast. I feel like there's so much here, such rich history that often gets overlooked if you're looking more at the capitals, if you're looking at what some people may say the bigger picture of history. I do notice that with some of the people that I interview who do have history backgrounds, we have our Legacy 1891 podcast, which features our very own faculty and staff, as well as some other individuals like Clark Curtis, who I've gotten to interview and who have spoken with us here at WRVS. And there really is that connection between history and stories. And it's kind of ironic because, of course, within the word history, you can't have history without stories. And so you've dedicated a lot of your career to telling these stories, from the early 1800s, even up to now. So in the context of what all is going on today, how education, a lot of different things are changing, how things are documented, et cetera, what is the importance of remembering history, of, going back in these archives, going back in these personal accounts?
Well, if it's not too soon to talk about Abraham Galloway, let me use him as an example, because Galloway is going to be the central figure in my lecture at Elizabeth City State. Okay. Mm-hmm. And, Galloway is the kind of individual that nobody had heard of 20 or 25 years ago. And his experience and his life is the kind that can still inspire us, that we can still learn from as we go about dealing with this world that we have that your generation is inheriting, and are trying to fight for justice and freedom and our humanity. Galloway was born a slave down near Wilmington. He escapes, goes north, works with the John Brown crowd, comes back, becomes sort of he becomes a spy during the Civil War. I think today we would say a spy master. And one of my students the other day said, I don't know if I agree exactly, but they called him a mix of Malcolm X and James Bond. He's operating as a spy all the way from the Chesapeake Bay to the Mississippi River, behind enemy lines. He goes on to found the first civil rights groups, the first African-American civil rights groups in the history of the American South that were called Equal Rights Leagues that happened on the North Carolina coast. Again, these are not the kinds of things I learned in school. He goes on, after the Civil War, he's organizing a black militia to fight the Ku Klux Klan in the streets of Wilmington. He's elected our first African-American state legislature, and he introduces the state's first constitutional amendment for women's suffrage. I, who have spent all my life as a historian of the North Carolina coast, never heard of him until I was 40 years old.
Absolutely. It's stories like these that do get overlooked, and I do thank you so much for, focusing on them, bringing them to light, bringing them to our public conscious.
If you can miss Galloway, you can miss anybody.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of things can get easily overlooked when it comes to history. When you really think about it, our everyday lives are technically history, but just history in motion for whoever, digs up our stories, our lifetimes in the future. And, hearing about Abraham Galloway, that does sound, really cool. It sounds like something out of what some people may, find to be like, historical fiction novel, but these are real people, James Bond and Malcolm X. That sounds crazy. That's really interesting.
When I first began running into stories on Galloway, I almost didn't believe them because they were so different than what I was taught about slavery and about the Civil War and the African freedom struggle, that it did take a lot, just to get my mind around it. And he's trying to bring about the end of slavery out of a base in Haiti before the Civil War. At that time, he's 21 years old.
Wow.
By the time he's 24, he's the most significant African-American figure in the American South. He leads the first delegation of Southern blacks to President Lincoln in the White House in 1864. And they're demanding the full right. At that point, Lincoln has done the Emancipation Proclamation, but he has not promised citizenship or the right to vote or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And Galloway is there to negotiate those terms. I'm a mama's boy. My mom's gone now, but I love, so I remember finding I think it was in the Duke archive, maybe the University of Massachusetts archive, where he goes against the orders of a Union general and goes 100 miles behind enemy lines to rescue his mother out of slavery in the middle of the Civil War. Mm. I was just like, that's my guy,
Absolutely. You just want to find out more about him. That's crazy.
So sorry to go on so much.
No, absolutely.
He is a flash, an incandescent flash of lightning. He lives only 33 years. Mm. His funeral was said to be the largest funeral in the state's history up to that time.
Mm-hmm. Think about what you can do with a life, what you can do in such a short amount of time. People often do reference, what Jesus did in his lifetime in the short amount of time, what Martin Luther King did in his lifetime, all these people dying, within their 30s. And I think it's a lot to be said. You said he was doing all these crazy things at 24 and I'm 24 and I'm like, wow, man, I can't imagine all of the courage that it took.
We got to get on it. Galloway would be there saying,
yeah,
go girl.
Galloway would be all like, okay, so are you going to do something? Or like, what are we doing?
Well,
and I think that's part of the stories that I help bring.
Now that you say that, now that you say that's kind of the thrust of what I want to try to do when I visit Elizabeth City, is that I have told the story of since I wrote a book about Galloway about 10 or 12 years ago, and it's been turned into a play and rap videos and all kinds of things. Though I still think a lot of people, awareness of Galloway is still growing, but what I really want to try to do in Elizabeth City is that at the end, whenever I talk about Galloway, people your age are always asking, what would Abraham Galloway do now? Like what? And in Elizabeth City, I'm going to certainly tell the story of Abraham Galloway's life. But I also usually I'm asked that question in the middle of like a question answer period where there's like 20 questions and all kinds. I really just sort of want to join in and invite people to help, after we've listened to sort of Galloway's life, let's put our heads together and think like, what would Galloway be doing now? What would he be at, if you were sitting down with him and giving advice based on his life, what would he say? So I don't think I have all the answers to that for sure, but I kind of want to give maybe my ideas, but also, see what the people the students and other people who are there, what they hear in Galloway's story that they think we might learn from today.
Absolutely. When we're looking back in history, a lot of people go, what would this specific figure do? And all we can do is glean from what they've left behind. And everybody does have different aspects of how they read that story because of just the different perspectives and lives we live. So focusing a little bit more on this talk that is coming up on, once again, Family Tuesday, April 21st, which is a free event. And family, it's located in the Student Center here at ECSU. And to get those tickets, you can go online to eventbrite.com and search up ECSU Community Connections and go ahead and reserve your spot. Once again, it's free, but you have to reserve your spot, or you can go online to the Community Connections panel at ecsu.edu. Now, focusing again on the talk, you've spoken with me about how, you were going through it and you almost couldn't believe how almost crazy his whole story sounded, and for it to happen in such a small period of time. What are some common discrepancies and misconceptions that you would like to debunk about slavery? I feel like when it comes to the Carolinas and when it comes to more of the South, there are a lot of misconceptions because the North tends to get, focused on a lot when we're talking about the Civil, War and Civil Rights Movement and things like that. So what are some common misconceptions you come across?
Let me tell you, there may be too many to count, but in Galloway's life, you see that the African Americans who were enslaved in the South, at least on the North Carolina coast, were organized were incredibly well organized. Galloway leads a procession of 4,000 enslaved people out who escaped from slavery all at one time into New Bern on a single night. 4,000 people. They spread the word. They already had the communication networks. At least in the maritime parts of the North Carolina coast, places like Elizabeth City, Edenton, New Bern, Little Washington, places like that. There was a rich, vibrant African American culture that was tied to the sea and was as politically sophisticated and of a kind of intellectual cosmopolitanism that just didn't, I guess I'm of an age, I grew up with kind of the Gone with the Wind version of, Southern history.
Yeah.
Around Galloway, one of his lieutenants was subscribing to the leading New York newspaper while he was still a slave. These were people who were tied to the rest of the world by the sea. African Americans, enslaved and free, were working on ships and going all over the world, and those people shared their information with the people in Elizabeth City and places other seaports like that. They knew what was happening everywhere, and they were just waiting for their moment when the Civil War comes. And once it comes, they really provide the difference between winning and losing. Galloway and his crowd immediately realize they want to destroy the Confederacy, but they have a lot of doubts about the Union in the North. They need to turn the Civil War into a war of liberation. No matter what anyone else thinks about it, they could care less about Grant and Lee and North and South. Mm-hmm. For them, they want to, and they succeed in turning it into a war of African American liberation. And you can see all that in Galloway's life.
It's so emboldening to hear about, these stories that historians like you go back and, reintroduce to the public. I feel like all of the history, we have so many different kinds of archives and things, and it's really just about what parts of history get focused on. Let's be honest, when we're talking about these big movements, there's certain figureheads that get focused on, especially when we're talking about public school educations. And like you were saying before, there's all kinds of figureheads that don't get talked about, even in your own schools, where locally you think they would, want to introduce more of a local aspect to teaching history. So you said you're looking forward to, really getting into Galloway's life and then hearing about how the students and the listeners will, perceive his story and what he would do now for this event. What advice do you have for anyone who wants to dig back in history to find other kinds of stories like these? And are there any resources that you found particularly useful?
You bet. Mm-hmm. For one thing, I do want to just affirm for people that, like, if you can miss Abraham Galloway, you can miss anything. And that it doesn't take somebody with a PhD or it just takes curiosity and a local library and the internet, and you will scratch the surface. And the things that get me excited are the ones where I'm looking at something and I go, well, that's not what I was taught. Mm-hmm. And then I go, well, is that just because I skipped school that day? Or is this like, what does it take to understand that? And you can go into an Elizabeth City library or to the university library, and you will go through the old newspapers. These days you can go online, especially at a public library university, and every newspaper that's ever been published in North Carolina almost is there for all time, free of charge. Subscription if you're not at a library, but you cannot look around, pick a date, pick a place, pick Elizabeth City, and just start reading, and you'll be amazed at what you'll discover. And then ask for help. The librarians are awesome. Go to the librarian and or the archivist at the university and say, I saw this. I want to know more about it.
Absolutely.
And I still do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm by now I feel like I go to a university or library and people think I should know everything, but they know how to find those things, and I lean into it.
So use your resources, family. That's what we're saying here today. Your resources in your community, and especially in smaller communities, tend to be a whole lot closer than you think. The state of North Carolina does have a unique avenue.
Yeah, the other thing that I love doing was talk with your grandmama.
Absolutely.
Or your grandfather or the neighbor next door. People always come to me and go, I meant to do that. Mm-hmm. This is like after their funeral. Mm. And you'll be surprised how often they they want to talk, they want to, everyone has a story in my experience, and they just have to be asked.
Absolutely.
And so much of what I hear on the North Carolina coast are stories that are kind of like Galloway's. I go, well, I didn't know that. That's unbelievable. I've never read that. And, yeah, so spend some time over a cup of coffee or chicken and dumplings, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
and visit with your grandma.
Absolutely. Chronicle these stories, even if not for anything public, for your family's own purposes. I'm thinking about how even, amongst my family, we have different kinds of accounts and things like that. Pictures say a lot of words, but family in today's world, a recording off of your phone because of how powerful voices are. And like I was saying when I talked earlier this year with Clark Curtis, who is documenting oral histories around Beaufort County and in other various places, it's crazy how transforming it is and how it almost takes you back to a time you were not alive for, listening to these oral histories, reading about these people. Education is extremely freeing. Like you were saying, there were slaves, people who were still enslaved with subscriptions to newspapers because they knew how freeing an education is. And I cannot wait for you to come to Elizabeth City and, like you were saying, you may get older, but you just keep learning every day. We don't know everything. It's impossible to know everything, but I feel like if you learn a little bit of something every day, you're doing all right. Thank you so much for interviewing with me today.
My great pleasure. I look forward to meeting you one day, and I look forward to visiting Elizabeth City next week.
Absolutely. Once again, family, that Community Connections event inside the Fire of Freedom with our lovely guest that we had here today, Dr. David Cecelski, is Tuesday, April 21st at 6 p.m. inside of the Ridley Student Center in the theater upstairs. If you want to get that ticket, reserve your spot because there are limited spots. You can go online to eventbrite.com, search up ECSU Community Connections, and reserve your spot there. You're listening to WRVS 89.9. It's Soul Cafe, and we're getting right back to the music right here.